The morning air in the large mansion felt colder than usual, even though the sun filled every corner with soft golden light. Inside the long hallway, a young maid moved quietly from one room to another, carrying a basket of folded linens against her chest. She walked with careful steps, always aware of her surroundings, always making sure not to disturb anyone. She had only been working there for a few weeks, but she already knew that this place demanded silence, discipline, and perfection. She came from a small neighborhood far from the polished streets where the mansion stood. Life there was simple, and she had grown up in a small house filled with the sound of music. Her father used to play piano in cafes and small gatherings, and sometimes he taught children for a little money. She loved those evenings when he played for her, when the notes floated through the house like fireflies. But things changed when he passed away. The piano in their home stayed untouched afterward, and she eventually stopped playing. The years were not kind, and now she found herself working as a maid, trying to support her mother and younger siblings. Although she was quiet, she had a gentle warmth in her eyes that remained even after all the hardships. And every day as she cleaned the mansion, she found herself drawn to the music room. The room was large, filled with shelves of old music books, and at the center stood a gleaming grand piano. She never touched it, never even stepped inside. But when the house was silent, she paused near the door just to listen to the faint vibrations left in the air from earlier practice sessions. The piano belonged to the owner of the mansion, an aristocrat known for his wealth and status. He carried himself with a sense of importance, his chin always held high, his footsteps echoing with authority. People whispered that he cared deeply about how others viewed him. His speeches in public were smooth, and his suits were always perfectly pressed. He hosted events that attracted influential guests, and he expected everything around him to reflect the same elegance. The maid had seen him only a few times up close. He spoke sharply when giving orders, his eyes sharp and observant. He noticed everything: dust on the table, a wrinkle on the curtain, even the hesitation in someone's voice. And although he rarely spoke of his feelings, the staff understood that he valued order and obedience above all else. One afternoon, when the maid was dusting the corners of the hall, she didn't realize the aristocrat was walking behind her. She paused, just for a second, because the soft echo of music drifted from the piano room. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, letting the memory of her father's playing wash over her. Her fingers twitched slightly, as if they still remembered the keys. The aristocrat stopped a few steps behind her, watching. "Why are you standing there?" he said. She jumped a little and quickly lowered her head. "Sorry, I heard the piano. It's not your place to linger around that room," he replied, his tone cool. She nodded quickly. "Yes, sir. It won't happen again." He stared at her for another moment, as though studying her expression, and then walked away without another word. The maid stood still, her heart beating fast, and reminded herself that she needed this job. She couldn't afford to make mistakes, but although she avoided showing it, she still felt drawn to the sound of the piano. And the aristocrat noticed it more than she realized. As the days passed, the household began preparing for an important event. A large charity gathering was scheduled to be held in the mansion, and guests from high social circles would attend. There would be speeches, performances, and elegant displays. The staff worked harder than usual, polishing every piece of furniture, arranging flowers in tall glass vases, and checking every room twice. The aristocrat walked around with a list in hand, giving instructions that left everyone scrambling. He wanted everything perfect. Nothing should look ordinary or simple. The floors should sparkle, the chandeliers should glow, and even the curtains should fall flawlessly. One afternoon, as the preparations continued, he noticed the maid carrying a tray down the hall. Her steps were careful, and her eyes stayed lowered. But again, she slowed when passing the music room, almost instinctively. Like someone listening for something familiar, he watched her closely. It bothered him, though he couldn't quite explain why. Maybe he thought she was pretending, or maybe he believed she was trying to act like someone who belonged near the piano. To him, the piano was a symbol of sophistication. The idea that a maid might be drawn to it felt almost amusing. Later that evening, he sat in his study thinking about the event program. He wanted something unique, that would surprise the guests and make them talk. Something that would elevate his social reputation further. As he looked at the list of planned performances, an idea formed in his mind, an idea that made him lean back in his chair with a small, satisfied smile. The maid. He remembered her expression, that soft pause, that unspoken longing. He imagined how uncomfortable she would be in front of a hall full of wealthy guests. He imagined the awkwardness, the confused notes, the embarrassment. To him, it felt like it would teach her a lesson about knowing her place. He convinced himself it was harmless, even humorous. A moment of entertainment for the guests. After all, she was only a maid. Surely she couldn't play the next morning. As the staff gathered in the kitchen for instructions, he entered with a calm expression that made everyone stand straighter. He spoke about the event schedule, the cleaning expectations, and the arrangements for the evening. Then, suddenly, he said, "There will be a short performance by one of the staff members." Everyone exchanged confused glances. A performance? Who? The maid was standing near the back of the room, drying her hands with a cloth. She didn't even imagine he meant her, but then he turned his gaze directly toward her. "You," he said. "You will play the piano tonight." The cloth slipped from her fingers. "Sir? I don't. I can't perform in front of guests," she said quietly. "You will," he replied firmly. "It is already decided." Then he turned away and continued giving instructions. As though he hadn't just changed her entire day. She stood still, frozen. The other staff members whispered softly, unsure what to think. Some felt pity. Others were simply shocked. Who would expect a maid to perform at an event of such high status? The maid tried to approach him later, hoping to explain, hoping he would reconsider. She found him reviewing decorations in the main hall. "Sir, please. I am not trained for such a performance. I don't want to embarrass you or the guests." He didn't even look at her. "All you need to do is play a simple tune. It will be amusing. Don't overthink it." His tone carried a finality that left no space for negotiation. She felt her chest tighten. She had played music before, yes, but those memories belonged to another life, a life she had left behind. She had not touched a piano in years, not since her father passed. And performing in front of strangers? That was something she had never done. But she had no power to refuse. When the evening finally arrived, the mansion transformed into a place of glittering glass and warm lights. Cars pulled up to the entrance, and guests stepped out wearing elegant clothes. The sound of polite laughter, greetings, and footsteps filled the air. The maid worked quietly in the background, helping arrange drinks, carrying trays, and staying out of the direct attention of the guests. But all the while, her heart beat heavily in her chest. Every time she passed by someone discussing the upcoming performance, she felt weaker. Some guests seemed curious, wondering what kind of entertainment the aristocrat had planned. Others expected something humorous, perhaps unusual. She felt small, alone, out of place, when the moment came. The aristocrat stepped onto the small stage in the gathering area. He tapped his glass lightly, drawing everyone's attention. His voice carried through the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight. As a small surprise, we will begin our evening with a brief piano performance from one of our staff members." Soft laughter rose from the crowd. Some seemed amused. Others looked intrigued. The maid felt her legs weaken. A staff member beside her gave a small encouraging nod, but even they looked unsure. The aristocrat gestured toward her. "Come forward." She took a deep breath and stepped out, feeling dozens of eyes on her. It felt like walking into a cold wind. The hall seemed larger than ever, every chandelier brighter, every guest taller. She approached the piano slowly. Her hands shook. Her breathing grew shallow. The aristocrat watched from the side, waiting to see her stumble, waiting for the awkwardness he had planned. But as she sat at the piano, something stirred inside her, a memory of her father's gentle laugh. The way he guided her hands, the nights spent practicing simple melodies. She placed her fingers on the keys, and though they trembled, they still remembered. The room fell silent. She closed her eyes, and the first soft note echoed through the hall. fragile yet sincere. She didn't know if she would play well. She didn't know if the guests would laugh or stay silent. All she knew was that for the first time in years, she touched the keys not as a maid, not as a servant performing for amusement, but as someone who once loved music deeply. The aristocrat watched with an expression. She couldn't see an expression that slowly, very slowly, began to change. And the night, which he had planned so confidently, was about to shift in a way he never expected. The room was filled with soft murmurs, curious eyes, and a quiet tension that felt heavy in the air. As the maid sat in front of the grand piano, her hands hovered over the keys, still trembling from the weight of the moment. She felt every gaze on her, like invisible hands pressing down on her shoulders. For a second, she considered standing up and walking away, even if it meant losing her job. But she stayed seated, because running would only make her situation worse. Her fingers pressed gently against the first set of keys. The note that came out was soft but clear. It carried across the room like a small spark, surprising even her. It had been years since she had last touched a piano, and she had half expected her hands to freeze completely. But something familiar flickered inside her. A faint memory of sitting beside her father as he played for her. She took a slow breath, letting the memory steady her. She tried another note, then another, building a small pattern she remembered from childhood. Nothing complicated. Nothing grand. Just a simple melody that was warm and safe. The kind of melody her father used to hum when repairing a broken stool or when waiting for tea to boil. The guests, who had expected an awkward performance, leaned in with surprise. Some lowered their drinks. Some exchanged small looks. The amused expressions they wore at the beginning slowly faded. The notes were gentle, but there was something honest in them. Something that didn't fit the image of a maid fumbling through. A performance. The aristocrat stood near the side, arms crossed, waiting for the moment she would make a mistake. He expected her hands to stiffen. He expected her to lose rhythm or press the wrong key. But as the melody grew smoother, he found himself staring, unsure how to feel. The maid felt the piano respond to her touch, almost as if it had been waiting for her. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She wasn't performing for applause. She was simply playing the one melody she remembered well enough to trust. And slowly, the fear in her chest loosened. Then she heard it, the hush in the room. The laughter had stopped. The whispers had stopped. She could sense the guests watching her differently now, not with mocking smiles, but with curiosity. The change made her nervous again. She wasn't ready for attention, not this kind. Her hands faltered for a second, and she almost withdrew them entirely. But a new memory rose in her mind, her father's voice, warm and patient. If you ever get scared, just listen to the sound. The music knows where to go. Let it guide you. She steadied her hands. She continued playing. The melody grew a little fuller, a little braver. Her fingers remembered the feeling of gliding from one note to the next. She let her emotions guide her more than her memory. The tune carried a soft story with it, a story of childhood evenings, of laughter in their small house, of her father's hands guiding hers. For the first time in years, she wasn't just a maid. She was the little girl who dreamed of becoming a pianist. From the corner of her eye, she caught a glimpse of the aristocrat. His expression wasn't mocking anymore. It was something sharper, something confused. He wasn't used to surprises like this. He wasn't used to being wrong. She played for just over a minute. Not long, not dramatic. But when she lifted her fingers from the keys, the final note lingered in the air like a warm breath. The room stayed silent, no laughter, no whispers, just silence. Then slowly a few guests clapped. Soft, at first, then louder. Others joined in, some nodding with pleasant surprise, some smiling warmly. They weren't laughing at her, they were genuinely impressed. The maid stood up quickly, not knowing where to look. Her face warmed with embarrassment, and she backed away from the piano as politely as she could. She didn't bow or speak, because she didn't know if she was supposed to. She only wanted to disappear from the spotlight. But before she could step away entirely, one of the guests approached the aristocrat. That was unexpected, the guest said. She plays beautifully. Where did you find her? The aristocrat forced a stiff smile. She is one of my staff, he replied, trying to keep his tone controlled. You should consider giving her more opportunities, the guest suggested. There's real potential there. The aristocrat didn't respond. His jaw clenched slightly. He hadn't planned for this. He had expected amusement, not admiration. Now the moment made him look foolish instead. The maid slipped away quietly while the room buzzed with new conversations. She found a small corner near the service area where no one would look for her. She pressed her hands together tightly, feeling the lingering tremble in her fingers. Her heart was still pounding, but now it felt different, lighter. It's almost warm. She didn't know how to interpret what had just happened. All she knew was that she had played without falling apart. And somehow, people had liked it. One of the older staff members approached her, placing a gentle hand on her arm. Are you all right? She nodded, though her eyes still looked dazed. I didn't think I could do it. Well, you did, the older staff member said with a small smile. And it wasn't just good. It was beautiful. I don't think anyone expected that, not even him. The staff member tilted their head toward the aristocrat, who was still surrounded by guests. The maid glanced in his direction, but quickly looked away. She didn't want to know what he thought. She just wanted the night to end, but it didn't end quietly. Throughout the remainder of the event, guests occasionally asked about her. Some wondered if she had taken lessons before. Others commented on her emotional style. A few even suggested she should consider training properly. These conversations reached the aristocrat repeatedly, each one adding to a small fire building inside him. By the time the event ended and the last guest left, the aristocrat's mood had shifted entirely. He walked through the now quiet hallways with sharp steps, his mind full of questions he hadn't expected to ask. Why had she played like that? Why hadn't she failed the way he predicted? Why hadn't she told him she could play? He entered the music room and stared at the piano. The keys still held the warmth of her performance. He placed his hand on the instrument, but instead of feeling proud, he felt unsettled. The maid stayed in the kitchen with a few other staff members, helping clean up the remaining glasses and plates. She hoped she could slip away without running into him again. She didn't want him to think she had tried to steal attention or show off, but as she carried a tray toward the hallway, she nearly bumped into him. He looked at her with an expression she couldn't read. Not anger, not exactly. More like confusion mixed with something heavier. You didn't mention you could play, he said. She lowered her eyes. I didn't think it mattered, sir. And I haven't played in years. I only remembered a small piece. He studied her for a long moment. It mattered tonight. She didn't know how to respond, so she stayed quiet. He finally stepped aside. Go rest for the night. We'll speak tomorrow. The words carried no clear meaning, and she couldn't tell if he was upset or impressed or something in between. She simply nodded and hurried away. That night, as the mansion grew quiet and she lay in her small room, she stared at the ceiling, unable to sleep. The melody she played kept replaying in her mind. Her father's face appeared in every warm memory. The music had awakened. She wondered what he would say if he had heard her tonight. Maybe he would smile. Maybe he would say he always knew she would play again. Her eyes grew wet, but she blinked the tears away. She curled up under the thin blanket and took a slow breath. Tomorrow would be another day, and she didn't know what the aristocrat had planned. But for the first time in a long while, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Somewhere in the mansion. The aristocrat sat alone in the music room, staring at the piano as if it held a secret he had overlooked for years. The melody she played still echoed faintly in his memory. It bothered him. It humbled him. And it left him with a question he wasn't ready to answer. Who exactly was the girl he had tried to embarrass? He didn't know much about her. He didn't care to learn before, but now he found himself regretting that. The performance had revealed something unexpected, something that reflected more on him than on her. For a long while, he sat in silence. Then, in a rare moment of honesty with himself, he admitted something quietly. He had underestimated her. And tomorrow, he would have to face the truth of that realization. whether he liked it or not. The morning light entered the mansion slowly, touching the floors, the tall windows, and the quiet hallways one by one. The air felt strangely still, as if the house had not yet decided what the new day would bring. The maid woke earlier than usual, sitting up slowly on her small bed. She blinked away the last traces of sleep and let her eyes rest on the small window beside her. The pale sky outside looked calm, almost comforting. But inside her chest, everything felt tight. She remembered every moment of the previous night. The piano keys under her fingers, the silence of the room, the unexpected applause, and the aristocrat's expression, surprised, confused, perhaps even unsettled. She wasn't sure what he would say today. She didn't even know if he would be angry or impressed, or if he would blame her for the attention she received. All she knew was that today, she would have to face him. She dressed quickly and tied her hair back as she always did, trying to keep her thoughts steady. She couldn't allow fear to distract her from her work. She needed this job, no matter how difficult certain moments felt. Her family relied on her earnings. She couldn't do anything that risked losing her position. When she stepped into the hallway, she saw some of the other staff already moving around, cleaning up the last traces of last night's event. The decorations had been taken down, and the tables had been cleared. Only a few flowers still lay scattered near the entrance, their petals missing some of their earlier brightness. One of the older staff members noticed her and gave her a warm nod. "How are you feeling today?" they asked. "I'm all right," she said softly, though she wasn't sure if it was true. "You did something wonderful last night," they continued. "Don't worry too much about what anyone thinks. Everyone saw your heart in that music." The maid forced a small smile, grateful for the kindness. But she knew that not everyone felt the same way. The aristocrat had not shown his true reaction yet, and she worried that whatever he had planned to say might not be kind. Throughout the morning, she cleaned quietly, avoiding the rooms where she thought he might be. She helped in the kitchen, wiped the glass cabinets in the hallway, and polished the shelves in the sitting room. But no matter how busy she kept herself, her thoughts kept returning to the piano. It had felt different last night, the sound, sensation, the sudden rush of old memories. She hadn't played for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to lose herself in the music. Even though she had played a simple melody, something inside her had woken up again, and that feeling both comforted and frightened her. As the hours passed, she began to hope quietly that the aristocrat might forget his promise to speak with her. Maybe he was too busy with his important work. Maybe he didn't see her performance as something worth discussing. But just before noon, she heard his voice behind her. "Come with me." She froze for a second, her hand still holding a cloth she had been using to dust the shelves. She turned to see him standing a few steps away. His expression was unreadable calm, but not warm and not cold either. Simply steady. She nodded and followed him down the hallway. They walked past the sitting rooms and the tall windows, then entered the music room. The piano sat in the center of the room, its surface freshly polished by someone earlier in the morning. He stopped near the instrument and turned to face her. "What you did yesterday," he began slowly, "was not what I expected." She lowered her gaze, waiting. "You played well," he added after a pause. The words surprised her. She hadn't expected praise, especially not from him. "Thank you, sir," she said quietly. "But why didn't you say anything?" He asked. "You've worked here for weeks, and I never saw any sign that you knew how to play." She hesitated. "I didn't think it mattered, and I haven't played in a long time." "How long?" he asked. "Since my father passed," she replied. "He taught me when I was younger. But after he was gone, things changed. I needed to work. The piano wasn't a part of my life anymore." He studied her face for several seconds. Something softened in his eyes, though only slightly. "You still remember?" he said. "Your skill didn't vanish." She didn't answer, unsure of what he wanted her to say. He walked around the piano, resting a hand on its smooth surface. The guests were impressed. "I imagine you already heard some of their comments." "I didn't speak to anyone," she said honestly. "I stayed in the service areas after I played." "Well, they spoke to me," he said. "More often than I liked. They assumed I knew all about your training, your background, everything. I had nothing to tell them. Hush. She lowered her head, feeling a mixture of guilt and discomfort. She hadn't meant to cause trouble for him. I didn't want to cause any problems, she said softly. You didn't, he replied. You surprised them, and you surprised me. She wasn't sure whether that was a good thing. The room grew quiet for a moment. The sunlight reflected off the piano lid, casting gentle patterns on the floor. Finally, he said, "Play again." She looked up sharply. Now? Yes, I want to hear it again. I want to understand what the guests heard last night. Her heart began to race. She stepped forward slowly, unsure if she could repeat what had happened the night before. That moment had been born out of fear, memory, and emotion, things she couldn't recreate easily. But she also couldn't refuse. She sat down, her hands shaking again. She placed them on the keys, hesitating. He stood behind her, waiting without expression. She tried the same simple melody as the night before. But today, under the bright morning light and the aristocrat's heavy gaze, it felt different. Her fingers were stiff. The notes sounded uneven. She faltered once, twice. Her heart sank. He stepped closer. Stop. She lifted her hands immediately. You're tense, he said. You're not playing the way you did yesterday. She swallowed hard. I'm nervous. Why? He asked. Because last night wasn't planned. I wasn't thinking. I just played what I remembered. Now I feel like I'm being tested. Her voice shook despite her attempts to stay steady. He thought for a moment. Then he said, "Leave the piano for now. We'll talk later." His tone wasn't harsh, but it wasn't gentle either. Simply firm. She stood up quickly and stepped back. He dismissed her with a small wave of his hand. She hurried out of the room, her face warm with embarrassment. She felt as though she had failed something she didn't even understand. The rest of the afternoon felt heavy. She tried to focus on her work, but every few minutes her mind drifted back to the piano room. She kept hearing his words, asterisk, "You're tense. You're not playing the way you did yesterday." Asterisk. She wished she could explain. How deeply her father's memory had shaped that moment. Last night, the sound had flowed through her without thought, carrying pieces of her past with it. But today, the pressure to repeat it turned everything rigid. Later in the afternoon, while she was folding sheets in the laundry room, a soft knock on the door startled her. She turned to see one of the kitchen staff holding a small tray. "He wants to see you in the study," the staff member said. Her stomach tightened again. Did he say why? No, the staff member replied. He only said it was important. She wiped her hands and followed the hallway toward the study. When she reached the door, she hesitated before knocking lightly. "Come in," his voice called. She stepped inside. The aristocrat sat behind his desk, papers spread in front of him. He gestured for her to stand near the center of the room. "I have received several messages from guests today," he said. "Some are still talking about your performance. A few even asked if you would consider performing again at future events." Her eyes widened. "Me, but I'm just a maid," he finished. "Yes, I know, but they don't seem to care about that." She didn't know what to say. He leaned back in his chair. "I don't want to waste opportunities. If the guests see value in something, I pay attention. Your performance has become one of the most talked about parts of last night." She felt both fear and disbelief creep into her chest. "Sir, I didn't mean to cause attention. I just tried my best not to embarrass anyone." "And you didn't," he said. "You did the opposite." Paused, then added, "Which means I need to reconsider how I view your position here." Her breath caught. "To remove you," he clarified, seeing her fear. "But perhaps your abilities are being wasted on simple tasks." His words didn't sound like a compliment. They sounded more like a calculation. "Do you want to learn again?" he asked suddenly. "The piano, I mean. Do you want to regain your skill?" She stared at him, stunned. No one had asked her that since her father's passing. The question felt too big, too heavy. "I don't know," she whispered. "I haven't thought about it for so long." "Think about it now," he said. "You may have a chance to do more than you're doing right now. But I need to know if you're willing." She looked down at her hands, remembering the warmth of last night's music. The emotion. The hope. Yes, she finally said, though uncertain. I want to learn again. But I don't know if I'm good enough. We'll see, he said simply. He dismissed her again, telling her they would discuss details later. She left the study slowly, her steps unsteady. Her heart raced, not from fear this time, but from a strange mixture of excitement and uncertainty. She had no idea what the aristocrat was planning. She didn't know if he truly wanted to help her, or if he was simply thinking about impressing his guests. But for the first time in years, someone had offered her a chance to reconnect with a part of herself she thought was gone, and that possibility scared her almost as much as it thrilled her as evening approached. She found herself walking by the music room again. She paused at the doorway, looking at the piano from a distance. The room was empty, quiet, the sunlight fading into softer colors. She stepped inside slowly, drawn like before. She reached out and touched the piano lid gently, her fingers tracing the smooth surface. She remembered her father's voice again. Music is not about perfection. It's about the heart. Her eyes softened. Maybe she could find her way back to the music after all, and perhaps without meaning to. The aristocrat had opened a door she thought was locked forever. She didn't know what part 4 of her life would look like, but in that moment, she felt something steady in her chest to quiet. Fragile hope that maybe things were starting to change in ways she could not yet understand. The hall was still buzzing with the sound of applause. When the maid quietly stepped away from the piano, her hands were trembling, not from fear anymore, but from the rush of emotions that came from playing again after so many years. The people around her were still talking excitedly, repeating the same words again and again: how unexpected her performance was, how she played with such heart, how she didn't look nervous at all, even though she felt like her legs were barely holding her up. She kept her eyes low as she moved toward the side of the room. She did not want to draw more attention. She had felt all those eyes while playing, and even though their expressions had changed from teasing to admiration, she still felt overwhelmed by so much attention. She had never imagined standing in such a grand room, performing in front of so many important people. She had always seen herself as someone who should only stay in the background, someone whose job was to clean, serve, and disappear before anyone noticed her. But for a few minutes, that changed. For a few minutes, she felt seen as she reached the corner of the hall. She heard someone calling her, but she kept walking, thinking they were calling someone else. It wasn't until a soft tap landed on her shoulder that she turned around and found a well-dressed older woman standing behind her. The woman wore a warm smile and held a small silver purse. She looked nothing like the guests who had laughed earlier. Her eyes held genuine kindness. "My dear, that was beautiful," the woman said gently. "You must be trained. Who taught you?" The maid shook her head shyly. "No training, ma'am. My father, he used to play. I learned from him when I was younger." The woman's expression softened even more. "He must have been proud of you. You played with such feeling." It touched everyone here. The maid felt a lump in her throat. Her father had been her whole world growing up, and the piano had been their shared language. He used to tell her that music could open doors, that words couldn't. She never understood that completely until this moment, before she could say anything. 2 more guests walked over: a tall man with glasses and a woman in a bright dress. They were smiling as well, and each of them started praising her performance. Their voices overlapped as they spoke about how she had surprised everyone, how rare it was to see someone play with such emotion, how she shouldn't hide her talent. She felt her cheeks grow warm. It's not from embarrassment, but from disbelief. She had never been complimented like this before. The tall man then asked something that startled her. "Have you ever thought about studying music seriously? With proper lessons, you could go very far." She looked down at her hands. "I never had the chance. Life kept changing and I had to work." The man nodded as if he understood. "Well, if you ever change your mind, I teach at a local academy. I would be happy to guide someone with your natural gift." She didn't know what to say. She opened her mouth slightly, but before words came out, a cold voice echoed behind them. "That will not be necessary. She has her duties here." The guest turned around, and the maid's heart sank. The aristocrat stood a few steps away, his expression unreadable. His eyes did not leave the guests, but she could tell his jaw was tight. He had not expected things to turn out this way. He had wanted to embarrass her, but instead, she had embarrassed him. The older woman smiled politely. She is very talented. I think it would be good to encourage her. The aristocrat forced a smile, though it did not reach his eyes. Indeed, she did. Surprisingly well. But she is a maid, not a performer. She has responsibilities here. The maid felt her stomach twist. She didn't want conflict, and she certainly didn't want to anger the man who provided her work. She quietly stepped back, but the older woman touched her arm gently. My dear, talent like yours should not be hidden. Don't let anyone stop you. Her voice was soft but firm. The aristocrat's eyes narrowed slightly. He looked at the maid as if reminding her silently where she belonged. For a moment, the room felt colder. But then something unexpected happened. One of the younger guests who had been watching from nearby spoke up loudly enough for several others to hear. Why does it matter if she's a maid? Talent is talent. I've heard trained students who don't play half as well as she does. Few guests murmured in agreement. The aristocrat glanced around and saw the shift. People were not laughing at her anymore. They were questioning him. He straightened his shoulders and tried to appear unfazed. But there was a stiffness in his posture now, a discomfort he couldn't hide. The maid wished she could disappear. She did not want people arguing because of her. She stepped forward slightly. Sir, I did not mean to cause any trouble. I only played because you asked. Her quiet voice softened the tension. The aristocrat took a breath and finally looked directly at her. His gaze held a strange mixture of frustration, surprise, and something she couldn't quite name. Ah! Yes, he said in a more controlled tone. And you did. Acceptable. That will be all. Return to your duties. Ass! The guests exchanged sharp glances. They could sense he was masking embarrassment, but no one pushed the matter further. The maid, wanting peace more than anything, nodded and stepped away. As she walked toward the hallway, one of the guests slipped a small card into her hand. If you ever need help, the woman whispered, call this number. Doors open when we least expect them. The maid looked at the card but quickly tucked it into her apron pocket before anyone noticed. She headed toward the back of the mansion, letting the noise of the event fade behind her. When she reached the quiet hallway near the service rooms, she finally let out a long breath. Everything felt unreal. The applause, the praise, the arguments, the unexpected opportunities. She leaned against the wall, closed her eyes, tried to calm her racing heart. After a minute, she heard footsteps approaching. She stood straight immediately, expecting another servant needing help, or perhaps the event coordinator giving instructions. But when she looked up, she was surprised to see the aristocrat himself. He stopped a few feet away from her. His expression wasn't angry, but it wasn't warm either. It was thoughtful, almost troubled. You didn't tell me you could play like that? He said quietly. She lowered her gaze. I didn't think it mattered. He took a slow breath. It would have mattered. You made a fool out of me in front of all those people. Her heart dropped. I didn't mean to. I only wanted to follow your order. He studied her face, and she could see a flicker of realization in his eyes. Maybe he understood that she had no intention of showing him up. Maybe he recognized that she had only done what he forced her to do. Still, he said, though softer, you changed the entire atmosphere of the event. She didn't respond. She didn't know what he expected her to say. He paused before speaking again. That music. It moved the crowd. Even I didn't expect that. She looked at him cautiously. I learned from my father. He loved playing. I only remembered a little. But tonight it all came back. The aristocrat nodded slowly. For the first time since she had known him, his voice lost its sharpness. Instead of seeing her as just a maid, he seemed to see something else, a person with a past. With memories, with talent. He cleared his throat. You may return to your work. The event is nearly over. She nodded and walked away, her steps light, but her mind full. The aristocrat stood there watching her leave, his expression unreadable. Something inside him had shifted. He didn't know what it meant yet. But he knew the night had changed more than just the atmosphere of his event in the servants' quarters. The maid finally had a moment alone. She sat on her small bed, pulled the card from her pocket, and looked at it again. It felt like a door she never expected to see. A door she wasn't sure she deserved to open. Outside, the last guests were leaving the mansion. People were still talking about her performance as they walked out. Even the musicians hired for the night nodded in respect. When they passed her, she placed the card under her pillow and lay back, staring at the low ceiling. The world suddenly felt bigger than it had that morning. Everything had changed in just a few minutes of music. She closed her eyes, not knowing what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in a long time, it didn't scare her. It felt like hope, and far down the hallway. The Aristocrat stood alone in the empty music room, staring at the piano she had brought back to life. The night after the event felt longer than usual. The maid barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard the echo of the piano, the applause, the voices praising her, and the Aristocrat's strange expression when he spoke to her afterward. It all felt unreal, like a dream trying to mix with her real life. Morning finally arrived. She got up earlier than anyone else. She wanted a quiet moment to think before the house woke up. She washed her face, tied her apron, and stepped into the hallway. The mansion was silent, and a soft light was coming through the tall windows. She walked slowly, still unsure how she felt. The first thing she did was check the small card she had hidden under her pillow the night before. She held it in her hand and traced the printed name with her finger. It belonged to the older woman from the event, the one who spoke so kindly. There was a number and a small note written on the back. "You have something special? Don't hide it." She folded the card carefully and put it in her pocket before heading downstairs. When she entered the kitchen, she expected whispers or stares from the staff, but instead, there was quiet. A few of the older workers glanced at her and smiled softly. One of them even gave her a small nod, as if saying he was proud. It warmed her heart, even if no words were exchanged. As the day went on, she tried to focus on her chores. She cleaned the hallway, dusted the shelves, and polished the wooden steps. But her mind kept drifting back to what happened. Every time she passed the music room, she felt her stomach twist. She knew she had to walk inside someday, but not today. Today felt too strange. By midday, the Aristocrat appeared. He walked through the halls with his usual calm posture. But there was something different in the way he looked around, as if he was thinking deeply. When he saw her at the base of the staircase, he slowed his steps. "You are working early," he said. She nodded, avoiding his eyes. "There is a lot to do today." She wished her voice didn't sound so nervous. He watched her for a moment. "About last night?" Her heart began to race. "Played well," he said. His tone was quiet, almost hesitant. "I did not expect that." She didn't know how to respond, so she only bowed her head slightly. "Thank you, sir." He looked as if he wanted to say more, but then he simply nodded and continued walking. She let out a breath as soon as he turned the corner. She couldn't tell if he was still upset or if he was trying to understand what he saw in her last night. The whole afternoon passed in a blur. The mansion was being cleaned up after the event. Decorations were being carried out, tables were moved back, and glasses were collected. She kept working quietly, keeping her thoughts to herself. Later in the day, while the sun was lowering outside, a knock echoed through the mansion. One of the guards opened the door, and the older woman from the event entered. She looked calm, elegant, and purposeful. The maid froze when she saw her. The woman noticed her almost instantly and smiled. "There you are," the woman said, walking toward her as if they were old friends. "I wanted to check on you." The maid didn't know whether to step back or forward. "Ma'am, I didn't expect you to come." The Aristocrat soon appeared from the upper floor when he heard voices. His steps halted when he saw the woman standing near the maid. "Madame," he said with polite surprise. "I didn't know you were visiting." The woman smiled at him, but her attention remained mostly on the maid. "I came because we didn't finish our conversation last night." The maid felt her heart pound. The Aristocrat's expression tightened slightly. "About what exactly?" The woman turned to him calmly. "Her future." There was silence. A long, heavy silence. The woman continued. "I believe she deserves a chance to study music properly. She has a real talent, something rare. I want to offer her a scholarship at the academy. Full support. Lessons, training, performances, everything. She looked at the maid kindly. I want to help you grow. The maid's eyes widened. Her throat felt tight and she couldn't speak. She never imagined hearing such words. The aristocrat finally spoke. That is, generous. But she works here. She has responsibilities. The woman raised a brow. Responsibilities? Or limits that you placed on her? Her voice wasn't harsh, but it was firm. The aristocrat looked away for a second, as if reflecting on his own thoughts. The maid quickly stepped forward. Please, I don't want to cause trouble for anyone. I am thankful for everything, but I don't want there to be conflict. Her voice trembled slightly. The woman touched her shoulder gently. Helping you is not a conflict, dear. It is an opportunity. She then turned to the aristocrat. And if she continues working here, I see no reason she can't study on the side. You don't have to lose her. You simply need to let her grow. The aristocrat stared at the maid. He looked at her in a way he never had before, as if seeing her for the first time, not as a worker, but as a human being with dreams. After a long pause, he finally said, If this is what she truly wants, then I will not stop it. The maid's breath shook. She didn't expect him to agree. She didn't even know if she was ready for such a big change. The woman smiled softly. Think about it, she whispered to the maid. There is no rush. But remember, some chances come once in a lifetime. She left shortly after, leaving the maid standing in the center of the hall, still trying to understand what had just happened. The aristocrat lingered nearby. After a moment, he asked quietly, Do you want this? She folded her hands nervously. I don't know. It scares me. I never thought of a future like that. I don't know if I'm good enough. Took a slow breath. You are, he said simply. You proved that last night. She looked up at him with gentle surprise. The aristocrat was not known for giving heartfelt words. But in that moment, his voice felt honest. Whatever you decide, he continued, I will respect it. He walked away after that, leaving her with a strange warmth in her chest. The mansion felt different now, less heavy, less limiting. That night, the maid sat on her bed again, the card in her hand. She thought about her father and the memory she had locked deep inside. She thought about all the times she passed the music room and felt her heart ache, wishing for something she could never have. Maybe she could have it now. Maybe the world wasn't as closed as she believed. The next morning, she approached the aristocrat in the hallway. Her voice was soft but steady. Sir, I want to try. I want to study. Right. He nodded. Then you will. There was no anger, no resistance, only acceptance. Within a week, arrangements were made. The woman from the academy welcomed her warmly during her first visit. The maid attended her first lesson with trembling hands and an eager heart. The moment she sat at the piano again, she felt alive. Her days became full and meaningful. She worked in the mansion part-time, still helping where she was needed. But her evenings were spent learning, practicing, and growing as a musician. The academy teachers were amazed at how quickly she improved. Months passed, and soon she was invited to perform at a small gathering. She was nervous, but the moment she began to play, her fear melted away. The audience listened quietly. Their applause afterward felt gentle and sincere. The aristocrat attended her performance as well. He sat in the front row, his posture straight, but his expression softened. When she finished, he was one of the first to clap. From that day forward, he treated her differently. Not as someone beneath him, not as someone to order around, but as someone who had found her path. Someone who had fought fear and uncertainty to reach a dream. As years passed, her name slowly spread beyond the walls of the mansion. People invited her to play at events, gatherings, and music halls. She remained humble, grateful for every opportunity. She never forgot the small card that changed her life. And she never forgot the night she was forced to play the piano in front of a crowd. The night that unexpectedly opened the door she needed the most. She grew. She learned. She transformed. And through it all, The aristocrat watched with respect, understanding that sometimes all a person needs is a chance. The story that began with embarrassment ended with hope. A maid no one noticed became a pianist everyone admired. And the music she once feared to play became the song that carried her into a brighter life.